I got body wash for my birthday, while my siblings received luxury gifts, so now I'm moving out, and everything has become chaotic. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 25 years old, and while most people my age are figuring out their dreams or having fun, I'm stuck juggling a demanding job and a family that seems to think I'm their personal ATM. It's not like I don't love my family. I do. But sometimes, love doesn't make the weight any easier to bear. My mom, Susan, is sick. She's been unwell for as long as I can remember. Some days, she stays in bed all day, claiming she's too tired or in too much pain to do anything. I get it. She's not in great shape. But that doesn't mean the house doesn't need cleaning or the bills don't need paying. Then there's my dad, Richard. He's old-fashioned, to put it nicely. In his mind, women are supposed to take care of the home, and men bring home the money. Except, in our house, I do both. He spends most of his days in his recliner, watching TV or tinkering, with things in the garage. If I even hint that I could use some help, he just grumbles, "That's not my job, Emily." My brother Joseph is 30, and I honestly don't know if he's ever held down a job for more than a few months. He's had run-ins with the law, and every time he gets into trouble, it's me who ends up covering the fines or dealing with the fallout. It's like he sees life as one big game, and I'm the unlucky player stuck fixing his mistakes. And then there's my sister Catherine, or Kate, as she prefers to be called. She's 27 and always has some excuse for why she can't keep a job. "My anxiety's too bad," she says, or "I can't deal with people." I understand that mental health is tough. I've had my own struggles, but it feels like she's using it as a shield to avoid taking responsibility. She spends most of her days scrolling on her phone or binge-watching shows while I run myself ragged. A typical day for me looks something like this. I wake up at 6, make coffee, and head to work. My job isn't glamorous, but it pays decently, though most of my paycheck goes straight into keeping the household running. After work, I come home to a house that's a mess, because no one else bothers to clean. I cook dinner, do laundry, pay bills, and maybe, just maybe, get a moment to myself before I collapse into bed. The hardest part isn't even the workload, it's the lack of appreciation. No one ever says, "Thanks, Emily," or "We couldn't do this without you." It's just expected. And if I ever mess up or fall short, the complaints come flying. "Why didn't you buy more groceries?" "The Wi-Fi's slow again. Can't you fix it?" It's like no matter how much I do, it's never enough. There's this constant voice in my head that tells me I'm supposed to do this, that it's my duty as a daughter and a sister. But lately, another voice has started whispering, asking, why I have to sacrifice everything for people who give nothing back. Sometimes I think about what my life would look like if I didn't have to take care of them. What would it feel like to spend my money on myself, to come home to a clean, quiet space, to have time to figure out who I am outside of all this responsibility? But then the guilt creeps in. What would happen to them if I left? Who would pay the bills or keep the house running? It's like I'm trapped in this endless cycle of obligation, and no matter how much I want out, I can't bring myself to break free. I guess that's what love does to you. It ties you to people, even when it hurts. And right now, I don't see a way out. If there's one day you hope people will appreciate you, it's your birthday. Just once a year, right? I wasn't expecting a parade or anything, but a little thoughtfulness would have been nice. Instead, my 25th birthday turned into another reminder of how invisible I am to my own family. The day started like any other. I woke up early, made breakfast, and got ready for work. Nobody said anything, no happy birthday or even an acknowledgement. I figured they'd forgotten, but I told myself, maybe they're planning a surprise later. That hope carried me through the day. At work, my colleagues remembered. They got me a card that everyone signed and even surprised me with a little cake during lunch. It wasn't anything fancy, but it made me feel seen. For a few hours, I let myself believe that the rest of my day would feel just as special. When I got home, the house was its usual mess. Dishes in the sink, shoes everywhere, and the faint smell of something burning from the kitchen. No balloons, no decorations, nothing to suggest anyone had remembered what day it was. Finally, my sister Kate walked into the living room with a bag. "Here," she said, shoving it toward me. Inside was a bottle of body wash, not even a nice one, just a cheap brand you'd grab at the grocery store. "Thanks," I muttered, forcing a smile. It wasn't about the gift itself. It was the fact that this was all the thought they put into it. A few weeks ago, I had helped fund Kate's extravagant birthday party. She wanted a spa day with her friends, and I covered most of the costs because Dad didn't come through with his promise to pay for it. Joseph came in next, barely looking at me. "Happy birthday," he said casually, dropping a cupcake from the gas station onto the counter. No candle, no plate. Just the cupcake, still in its plastic container. I waited, hoping maybe my mom or dad had something planned, but hours passed, and nothing happened. Dinner came and went, with me cooking as usual, and everyone went about their evening like it was any other day. The tipping point came when I overheard my dad talking to Kate. He was laughing about how much he'd spent on her birthday gift, a designer bag she'd been begging for. "It was worth it," he said, to see her face light up. I couldn't hold it in anymore. "Are you serious?" I blurted out, walking into the room. "You spent that much on Kate, but you couldn't even bother to plan something for my birthday?" They stared at me like I was overreacting. "What are you complaining about?" Kate said, rolling her eyes. "You got something, didn't you?" "It's not about the gift," I snapped. "It's about how none of you care. I do everything for this family, and you can't even put in the bare minimum for me." Dad waved me off. "Don't be so dramatic, Emily. It's just a birthday." I felt my chest tighten. The lump in my throat threatened to choke me, but I refused to cry in front of them. Instead, I turned and went to my room, slamming the door behind me. That night, lying in bed, something inside me shifted. I thought about all the years I'd given to them, all the sacrifices, all the times I put their needs above mine. And for what? A bottle of body wash and indifference on the one day I hoped to feel appreciated? I couldn't keep living like this. Something had to change. 2 months passed since my birthday, but the sting of that day lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was just stuck. Stuck in this cycle where my needs were always secondary to everyone else's. And the more I tried to ignore it, the more it became impossible to deny. I had to get out. I had been thinking about it for weeks. The idea of moving out on my own, having a space where I didn't have to clean up after everyone, where I didn't have to hear complaints or feel like I was invisible, it was almost too good to be true. But the fear of leaving them behind, of abandoning them when they needed me most, kept me tied to this suffocating life. But then, one evening, after a particularly exhausting day at work, I looked around the cluttered living room. Dishes piled. Up, my mom lounging on the couch with her blanket, my dad in the kitchen complaining about the food I'd made, Joseph playing video games in the corner, and I realized something. This wasn't my life anymore. It couldn't be. That night, I called Janet. She's been my friend for years, and though she never directly said anything, I could tell she saw what I was going through. "I'm thinking about moving out," I told her, my voice shaky. There was a long pause, then she said, "Emily, I've been waiting for you to say that. You deserve to have your own space. You deserve to have a life." I exhaled a breath I didn't even realize I was holding. "But I can't just leave. What if they need me? What if—" "Emily," she interrupted softly, "they've been needing you for years. You can't keep carrying their weight. They'll figure it out." Her words hit me hard. For the first time in a long while, I felt like someone actually saw me, saw how much I had been giving, and understood how much I needed to take care of myself. I decided then and there that I would do it. I didn't have a plan, but I knew it had to happen. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. I started looking for apartments, setting aside money, and mentally preparing myself for the fallout I knew was coming. I told myself that once I made the decision, I wouldn't turn back. But deep down, I was terrified. On moving day, my heart raced as I packed up the last of my things. I didn't tell anyone. I couldn't face the argument, the guilt trip that was sure to follow. My plan was simple. Get out, get settled, and then explain. Janet helped me every step of the way. She brought her truck and we loaded everything up. My clothes, a few pieces of furniture, some kitchenware. I felt a sense of freedom with each box that went into the back of her truck. When we finally arrived at the new apartment, I felt a mix of excitement and panic. The place was small, just a one-bedroom, but it was mine. I could finally breathe. I didn't have to worry about cleaning up after people who didn't care. I could leave dishes in the sink if I wanted to. I could walk around without hearing complaints or being judged. The first night, I sat on the floor of my new living room staring at the empty walls. I couldn't believe I had done it. I felt a rush of relief, but also this nagging guilt. What if they need me? That voice still whispered in my head, but it wasn't as loud anymore. I had made the choice for me, and that was something I hadn't done in years. I knew the hardest part was still coming. I'd have to face my family sooner or later, and I had no idea how they would react. But for the first time in so long, I felt like I was finally living for myself. And in that moment, as I curled up on the couch in my new home, I knew I was going to be okay. It had only been a few weeks since I moved out, and life in my new apartment had started to feel like the fresh start I needed. I could relax when I came home from work, no longer burdened with the constant demands of my family. I was finally able to take care of myself, something I hadn't done in years. Then, one night, I heard a knock at the door. It was late, around 10 p.m., and I wasn't expecting anyone. I peeked through the peephole and froze. It was my family. I opened the door reluctantly, feeling a wave of unease wash over me. My father, Joseph, and Kate stood there, looking almost demanding. "We need to talk," my dad said, his tone firm. I stepped back, surprised. "Why didn't you call first?" "It's late," I asked, feeling a mix of annoyance and confusion. Kate, looking slightly uncomfortable, spoke up. "We heard from a friend who saw you at the complex. We were worried about you." My father grumbled, but Joseph was already inside, pushing past me without asking. "You've got a nice place here," he said, looking around the apartment, with a smug smile. "Living well, huh?" I clenched my fists. I wasn't sure if they were here to check up on me, guilt-trip me, or something worse. But I didn't want them here. Not like this. Then, Kate dropped a bombshell. "So, can I move in?" she asked, almost casually. "I need somewhere to stay." I felt a surge of frustration. Move in? After everything? I could already picture it. Her staying here, living off me again while doing nothing to help herself. I shook my head. "No, Kate, you can't move in. I'm not going to do that again." Before I could say anything more, Joseph stormed past me, heading straight for the living room. "What's your problem, huh?" he shouted, glaring at me. "You think you're better than us now?" His voice was rising, and my heart was pounding in my chest. My father started rummaging through my things, flipping over papers on the coffee table, as if my apartment was just another place to treat like his own. "Where's the TV? You're just living here by yourself with all this fancy stuff," he muttered, clearly dissatisfied. I had had enough. "Get out!" I snapped, my voice trembling with anger. "All of you, get out of my apartment." But they refused. My father stood in the doorway, blocking me. "We're not leaving until we talk," he said stubbornly. I didn't know what else to do. In that moment, I knew I couldn't handle this on my own anymore. I called security, and my friend Janet, who had been with me earlier, made the call to the police. The tension in the air was suffocating, but I didn't back down. When the security arrived, my father and Joseph still didn't want to leave. The situation escalated quickly, and the police were called. The chaos in my own home was enough to make me feel like I was losing control. But when the officers arrived, they took charge, and both my father and Joseph were arrested for trespassing and disturbing the peace. I stood in the hallway, my stomach in knots. It was over now, but it was a strange, bittersweet victory. I wasn't sure if I had done the right thing, but in the end, I knew I couldn't let them keep invading my space like this. The days that followed the chaos of that night were a blur, each one blending into the next, filled with tension and uncertainty. The arrest of my father and brother had rocked me in a way I hadn't expected. On the outside, I appeared calm, almost relieved, finally free of the constant pressure and manipulation. But inside, it was a different story. My phone didn't stop buzzing with messages. Friends, acquaintances, even strangers who had heard the news, reached out to express their shock, their sympathy, or simply to ask what had happened. I couldn't bring myself to respond. It was too much to explain, too complicated to put into words. Everyone thought they understood, but how could they? How could anyone really understand the emotional toll of years spent supporting a family that never gave anything back? Joseph, with his criminal history, had gone back to jail for a year. The thought of him locked up didn't bring me comfort. In fact, it stirred something deep inside me, a sense of guilt. I knew he had made his own choices, but he was still my brother. His life, his mistakes, they affected me in ways I hadn't anticipated. But I also knew I couldn't carry that guilt, not anymore. I had spent far too long trying to save him, trying to fix everything that had gone wrong in our family. I had to let go. As for my father, he was facing the consequences of his own actions, fines, probation, and the constant reminder that any misstep could land him back in prison. I didn't know how he would handle this, but I also didn't care. The man who had once promised to be there for me was a shadow of that person now, caught up in his own problems, and I had no energy left to invest in his redemption. He had never been the father I needed, and after everything, I wasn't willing to pretend anymore. The hardest part, though, was my mom. Her health had always been a concern, but now it was more serious than ever. She was refusing to take care of herself, ignoring the signs her body was giving her. She'd always been stubborn, but now it was like she was actively sabotaging herself. I tried to reach out to her, offering help, advice, even just a listening ear. But every time she pushed me away. "I'll be fine," she'd say, and that was the end of it. I remember one conversation that stuck with me. I had tried, once again, to talk to her about her health, urging her to see a doctor, to change her lifestyle. She was quiet for a long time, and then she said something that cut deeper than anything I had expected. "I don't know why I should bother anymore," she said, her voice small and tired. "I've failed you all. What's the point?" I could hear the sadness in her words, and for a moment, I wanted to jump in and fix it all for her. I wanted to tell her that it wasn't her fault, that she hadn't failed me. But I stopped myself. I couldn't keep doing that. She had to want to change. She had to make that choice for herself. I couldn't do it for her anymore. I ended the call feeling a mix of frustration and heartbreak. Part of me still wanted to go back to my old role, taking care of her, putting her needs above mine. But I knew that wasn't healthy. I couldn't be the savior anymore. I had to take care of myself first. A few days later, I heard from Kate. The news was even worse than I could have imagined. She had gotten involved with drugs. I had always known there was something dark lurking beneath the surface of her behavior, but I hadn't expected it to go this far. She had ended up in trouble, arrested for drug possession, and was now facing charges. The part of me that still cared for her wanted to jump in and help, but I knew better this time. She had chosen this path. She had made this choice, and it wasn't mine to fix. I didn't even know how to process it. She was my sister, and I wanted to protect her, but I also knew that this was beyond me. I couldn't save her. I couldn't fix what she was doing to herself, and even if I could, I wasn't sure it would be enough. She had to take responsibility for her actions, just as I had taken responsibility for mine. In the midst of all this, I started to reflect on everything that had led me here. I had spent years trying to hold my family together, to support them in every way I could, even when it meant sacrificing my own happiness. I had spent so much time and energy trying to make them feel whole, to make them feel like they mattered, that I had lost sight of my own worth. The reality was painful, but I had to face it. My family wasn't going to change unless they truly wanted to. No amount of effort from me was going to fix them. I had to learn to let go, to stop carrying their burdens. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the guilt weighed heavily on me. But deep down, I knew it was the right decision. I wasn't responsible for their choices, no matter how much I loved them. I had done everything I could for years. Now, it was time to live for myself. The weeks that followed the chaos with my family were a strange mix of relief and guilt. The apartment felt like a safe haven, a fresh start. For the first time in years, I could wake up and not feel weighed down by the responsibilities of everyone else's problems. I was finally free, but that freedom didn't come without its own set of challenges. I was learning how to navigate life without constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for a call from my mom or a text from Kate asking for help. I could finally breathe without that constant undercurrent of stress hanging over me. But the silence was also loud, especially when it was just me. It felt both peaceful and a little unnerving. I spent my days focusing on work, but something had shifted inside me. Work no longer felt like an escape. It felt like a path to something more. I was finally allowing myself to grow, to make decisions that were based on what I wanted, not what my family expected of me. I joined a small book club, something I had always wanted to do but had never made time for. I started going to the gym in the evenings, something that felt like a small rebellion against the years of neglect I had put myself through. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had control over my life. And yet, I couldn't ignore the fact that my family's issues still loomed in the background. My mom, who had always been stubborn, refused to acknowledge how much she was struggling. She'd gotten worse since I left, both physically and emotionally. I tried calling her, but the conversations were always brief, with her downplaying everything. "I'm fine," she would say, even though I could tell she wasn't. One day, I decided to stop by her house unannounced. I hadn't seen her in a while, and something told me I needed to check in. When I arrived, she was sitting on the couch, her face pale and tired, but she insisted she was okay. The house was dark, and the air inside felt heavy, as though the walls were closing in. "Mom, you're not okay," I said gently, sitting beside her. "You need to see a doctor. You need to take care of yourself." "I don't have time for that," she snapped, her eyes darting away from mine. "I'm fine, really." I could feel the old frustration rising within me, but I held it in check. I wasn't going to fight with her. I had done enough of that already. "I just don't want to lose you," I said, my voice soft. "You're all I have left." There was a long pause. She didn't respond, but I could see the pain in her eyes. I wanted to say more, to push her to get help, but I knew I couldn't. She had to make that decision herself. I left her house feeling a heavy sadness in my chest. As much as I wanted to save her, I knew I couldn't. She had to save herself, and I had to let her. A few days later, I got a letter from Joseph. It was simple, just a few paragraphs, written in his familiar scrawl. He apologized for everything that had happened, for the chaos he had brought into my life, for the pain he had caused. He said he was trying to turn things around, that he was learning from his mistakes. I didn't know how to feel. Part of me wanted to forgive him, to accept his apology, but the other part of me wasn't sure I was ready to welcome him back into my life. Not yet. Not after everything. He had a lot of work to do on himself, and I wasn't going to be the one to fix it for him. Instead of writing him back immediately, I let the letter sit on my desk for a few days. I needed time to process it. I had learned through all the mess with my family that rushing into decisions only led to more pain. This time I was going to take things slow. I also received news about Kate. The situation had gotten worse. She had been arrested for possession and was now facing charges that could land her in jail for a long time. Part of me wanted to rush to her side, to fix things for her. But the other part of me knew that if I didn't let her face the consequences of her actions, she would never learn. She had chosen this path, and it wasn't my responsibility to bail her out. I decided to write her a letter that wasn't filled with anger, but with honesty. I told her I was worried about her, that I loved her, but that she needed to take responsibility for her life. I couldn't help her if she wasn't willing to help herself. I didn't know what would happen, but I hoped that somehow, somewhere, she would find her way out of the darkness. With all of this weighing on me, I found myself reflecting on the choices I had made. I had spent so much of my life trying to fix everyone else, trying to be the solution to their problems. But I was learning now that I couldn't do that anymore. I couldn't save my family. They had to save themselves. It wasn't easy. There were days when the guilt would creep in, reminding me that I should be doing more, that I should be helping my mom, my dad, my siblings. But each time I felt that pull, I reminded myself that I had to take care of me. I had to stop giving so much of myself away. For the first time in my life, I was living for me. And it felt strange, but also exhilarating.